The NFL draft is over, and just like when you take a test, it's time for the grades. We're going to begin tonight with the NFC North. Hey guys, I'm your host of the Draft Beard Podcast. My name is Joshua Klein. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. And we're going to recap the NFC North. And before we do that, if you could do me a favor, if you could like, subscribe, and share, I would really appreciate it. That does help us content creators get our content into the eyes and ears of those who are most interested in the topic we're talking about. In this case, it's all things NFL draft, and some sports related stuff. So if you guys could do me a favor, if you could like, subscribe, and share, don't forget to hit that notification bell. That way you do not miss a single episode of the Draft Beard Podcast. So tonight we're going to be recapping the teams from the NFC North. And so before we get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of how I kind of came about my stuff. And you'll see a graphic there, hopefully on the screen, that will show what my big board had as the player's overall value. I also inputted the consensus big board value, and you'll see there the difference. You can tell right away if that looks like that player, according to my board, the consensus, it was a reach or they got exceptional value. And so hopefully that helps aid you a little bit into what my thought process is regarding this. And then we're going to go through, I'm not going to go through each individual pick and go into a deep dive of every pick. I'll give you my overview, what I think about the pick, scheme fit wise, value for the draft, or including the value of where they got picked or if they had to trade up or down to get that player. So we're going to get started right away with the Chicago Bears. And so the Chicago Bears started off their draft, drafting Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan. I really like Colston. I had him as my number 11th overall player. I had him and Tyler Warren, just one spot. I had a difference between each other with Warren at 10 and Colston Loveland at 11th overall on my board. And so I like the player. This year's draft is a little different. Just the way it kind of fell. I usually don't have tight ends that high on my draft board. And with the Bears pick here, I think it's a good pick for what Ben Johnson wants to do. I really thought that in the first round here, whether it was they moved up and got Genty, they'd come away with a running back or they'd come away with a tight end. I did kind of lean them going more with the Colston Loveland than the Tyler Warren. I think he fits a little bit more schematically with what he wants to do. He'll be able to run a lot more 12 personnel, utilize Loveland kind of as that Sam Laporta role that he had in Detroit. So I do like the pick for where it fits within Chicago's system and what Ben Johnson wants to do. And it fits their value-wise as well. However, on the flip side, I also don't like picking tight ends that high for a couple of reasons. Number one, draft history has shown that picking tight ends that high more often than not doesn't work out. The other is the value that you're paying said player based on the salary that they're going to get for being that pick. And that puts the player picked that high at much higher on the wage scale for that position. So you're going to pay Colston Loveland a lot more as a starting rookie tight end than what I would normally be comfortable with. But that's just the way kind of the draft works. The Raiders are going to do the same thing here with Ashton Genty. Genty is going to be, in the top 10, I believe, of all running backs paid in the NFL, just based on the draft scale there that you're slotted in for that pick. So I like the player. I actually like the fit, not as high on the pick in terms of what it says salary-wise and also the history of drafting tight ends that high at number 10 in the overall. When they come back in the second round, they pick Luther Bird in the third. Now, I wasn't as high on Luther. I had him at 40 overall player. The consensus had him at 25. I do think he's a really good yards after the catch guy. He has better hands than what people give him credit for. He's a better contested catch guy than what gets talked about out there. I do see the flashes with Luther Bird, and I know his 24 tape is so much worse than the 2023 tape. I just worry about with that pick, was there a better player there if they wanted a receiver that would fit more with what Ben's trying to do? As a Kyle Williams, get the speed, get the JMO type speed. Is Luther Bird in the third going to be a little redundant with what they have in DJ Moore? I also am not sure that he is the attitude fit that I personally like. Like, he's not your Amon-Ra St. Brown, kind of the team guy. games and on the sideline. Now his kind of being diva-ish a little bit, quitting on the field, just not look like giving that full effort. I get it. The scheme in Missouri this year wasn't that great. The way they were utilizing him, the quarterback play just wasn't that good this year. Cook had definitely much worse tape and performance in 24 than he did previous. So I'm kind of nitpicking this pick. I see the potential with what Ben Johnson wants to do. I mean, Ben Johnson is going to have to be a masterful genius that he is, just kind of scheme up Luther Burden. I do see the potential. I might have went in a little bit different direction than Luther Burden. There, I really was surprised that they didn't get a running back here. I think what you saw throughout most of the Bears draft, if you look at how many times they traded down, the running back that they wanted just got picked just before them. At least that's the way it appears when you see how the draft played out. It's kind of a little criticism. They didn't end up with one of the more premier running backs in a loaded running back class. Well, we'll discuss the running back they did get later in the draft. They came back in the another second round pick at pick 56. This is going to be their second of 3 second round picks, picking up Ozzie Trapalo, the offensive tackle out of BC. Big guy, super tall at 6'8". He's a little thin and wiry at 316 pounds. Decent blocker. I think you got a guy here who could be a potential Braxton Jones replacement. I know the tackle run was starting to run here, and so I had Ozzie as my 93rd overall player. Consensus had it at 77. So it appears to be, at least comparing to the draft board, a little reach. Maybe not so when you look at how many tackles were left and how many were just going off the board. So I think that's a decent pick there for Chicago. It gives them some added flexibility, some depth on the offensive line, gives someone to develop, and maybe you don't have to overpay for a left tackle, especially when you saw in this last year's free agency how much money even just average left tackles are getting on the open market. So good protection for Chicago to hopefully not have to do that and spend a lot of money and getting a player that I think has the potential in Ozzie Trapalo. Then come back with another second round pick at pick 62, getting Shamar Turner. He is a player that I wasn't as high on as consensus either. I had him at 95 on my board. Consensus had him at 75. He's kind of like the jack of all trades. He can play anywhere along the defensive line. I do see kind of the fit there. He's really athletic. He's really long. I think he could develop into maybe a serviceable starter at the NFL level. Like a lot of the Texas A&M guys didn't perform as well as what we'd hoped at Texas A&M. I'm hoping that's just a kind of a schematic thing, and that those players that are coming into the draft this year, that what we saw in 2024 is not what we're going to see when they get to the NFL. But I think it's at least a good pick, that a guy that can learn behind Grady Jarrett, be a rotational piece, maybe play him out on the edge, play him on inside. So that wasn't a bad pick. There might have been a few other players I might have liked a little bit better in that spot, but they went and added a piece to the defense, their first one that they added to the defense in this draft. Then they come at pick 132 in round 4. And this is a pick that I just think is off the rails. Ruben Hippolyte the second. This just comes across as that height, weight, speed guy. I didn't have him rated. If you look on my little graphic that should be on the screen, you'll see the red highlight there. That shows a ranking that the player wasn't ranked, at least in the top 257. So that means they weren't ranked in the 257 players. Remember, there's 257 picks in this year's draft. And if it's bolded, you'll see that just means that player wasn't even on the consensus big board when I was looking through it. And they did 480 players. So Ruben was one of the first players drafted that was not on the consensus big board. Major reach there. Just an absolute speed demon. I didn't see any of his film except for what I saw afterwards. So just a guy who was really on nobody's radar, maybe till really late in the process. So an absolute massive reach there. Definitely plenty of other players I would have rather seen on the board who at least had shown better film than just being a super fast guy, a developmental guy. Like if you took him maybe in round 6 or 7, totally understand it. But using pick 132 when there's 100 and some picks left to go in the draft, So when you're about halfway through the draft and that's the player you pick, that's a very puzzling and surprising pick. But they come back up. They maybe redeem themselves at pick 169 and picking Za Frazier, the 6', 386 pound cornerback out of the University of Texas, San Antonio. This is the one of those talked about sleeper gem guys amongst the draft community. A lot of people liked. I think this is a really solid pick to take a flyer here in the 5th round on a guy who a lot of people were comparing to that Tariq Woolen, same kind of height, size, speed at corner. I had Za as my 162nd player on the big board. He went at 169. Consensus had him at 117. They were much higher on him than I was, but I think that was a really solid pick there. And then we come back in. Sorry, this pick 169, 160, 195 is Luke Newman, the offensive tackle, maybe guard out of the University of Michigan State. I think he as a solid backup player there. I think maybe he can play anywhere on the interior of the offensive line is probably where he's going to fit. I did have him at least ranked in my top 257, so I had him at 218. I saw him as like a 6th round grade. Consensus big board did not. I think that's a decent pick there as a developmental interior offensive lineman. That's kind of the player maybe you take at that spot to be a backup. And then they get exceptional value with Kyle Monangai. Ben Johnson at least finally gets a running back to fill that Thunder David Montgomery role on Kyle Monangai. I had him 148 on my board. Consensus had him 182. Really liked this guy. He's going to be a person, a running back he's not going to lose yards. He's going to fall forward. He's going to fight for all those extra yards. Going to be a good short down yardage running back. I think that he's going to blend well there. I really think that Ben Johnson really wanted to try to get a replacement for DeAndre Swift, have more of the running back with the Lightning there. I think they get the Thunder here. I think this is a pretty solid pick for Chicago, especially getting him in the 7th round. He's kind of an underrated running back. Wasn't talked a lot about in terms of the upper tier running backs in this draft class. So that was good value there by the Chicago Bears in the 7th round. I liked the first pick at Loveland. Again, I'm kind of marginally disagreement with the pay structure that you get there. The 4th round pick, terrible. Not a big fan and as compared to everyone else in Luther Burden. I think he's kind of redundant. I gave the Bears a solid B- grade in this draft. Again, my favorite pick, even though I'm nitpicking a little bit, was Colson Loveland. The best value pick was Kyle Monangai. And the absolute most head-scratching, puzzling pick was Hippolyte there in the 4th round. So again, a B- grade for the Chicago Bears. And now we're going to move up north a little farther and head up to Minneapolis and talk about the Minnesota Vikings as they started out their draft with Donovan Jackson, the guard out of Ohio State, went 24th overall. He's a player that I really, really liked. He was actually my number 1 rated guard. I had him as 19th overall. The consensus big board had him at 37. I was really surprised that the Vikings didn't move down, especially with what you saw happen with the Giants moving up, with the Falcons moving up. I got to imagine that the Vikings were getting calls. It was such the most obvious team out there that looked like if there was a team that needed to move up, Minnesota would just be ripe for the picking. And considering they came into the draft with 4 total picks, and they ended up with 5 total picks. So that was a really a surprise. I know on the flip side, they've now drafted a player who I was really high on, and I think it's going to help solidify them, at least on paper, as having one of the better offensive lines in the league. I still probably would have weighed that and looked at, okay, what type of value? If I'm getting offered a 1st round pick in next year's draft, which I don't know if it's speculation, that may or may not have happened, but if you see what happened just a couple picks later, I got to imagine that Minnesota has probably offered something similar given their draft pick situation and how few they had. I think that's a much better job at roster building in the future to trade down, maybe not get a player as highly ranked on your board, but pick up future assets next year, or maybe the trade that the Giants made, picking up a future asset in the 3rd next year and getting another 3rd this year probably would have been much better value than getting a player that even I really liked and had in my top 20 overall player in this draft, guard tackle versatility with Donovan Jackson. So that's what I would have done. Even though I really, really liked the player, I just think it's going to leave them. And now you see with the rest of their draft class, it leaves them kind of like no depth at all whatsoever. And the next pick they had is in the third round to pick 102, and they picked Ty Felton out of Maryland. I had him at 166 on my draft board. Consensus had him at 126. And this is a puzzling pick for me. I think most of the draft picks that they made, I kind of was like, huh. And this might be the most puzzling of them all. Ty is a speedy type receiver. I just, with what was else on the board, I was really surprised that Ty is a player that went ahead of him, considering there's so many other receivers there. I mean, he's got some size at 6'2", 186. He's good after the catch, but he has some drop issues. I just think there were better players on the board, not only in just in wide receiver, but just maybe would have added some depth. They could have used some safety depth, some corner depth. They did address defensive line. I kind of understand, but they could have gotten maybe a better player here for some defensive line depth. I just don't know where he fits. Where's he going to fit on the roster, considering what else they have on the roster? So I was just a very, very puzzling pick. There were a lot of receivers I liked much better than Ty Felton there. I had Ty as my number 19th receiver in the draft. Now, a couple of the guys that are in front of him didn't get drafted. So again, maybe I'm wrong. Most of us at least have at worst a 50% hit rate, or maybe I should say at best. I mean, most of us are more wrong than right when we're looking at prognosticating our draft picks. And it's not a very easy thing to do. And it's really, really hard. And most of us are wrong more than they're right. So I had Nick Nash ahead of him. I had a guy like was Elijah Badger. Obviously, he didn't get drafted, but a Jalen Lane, Torrey Horton, those type of guys were there. I just think that would have been better value or another position. Then we moved on to their 5th round pick in 139 that they took Tyron Ingham Dawkins. He's a tweener who can play probably on the outside as a bigger defensive end or on the inside as maybe a smaller defensive tackle. He's pretty athletic. I think he does provide some depth there. I had Tyron Ingham Dawkins as my 224th player, and he went 139. So the value it's a little bit of a reach, but the consensus had him at 176, so they don't see him as bad of a reach. Then they come back at pick 201 and grab Kobe King, kind of like, good special teams, maybe a depth linebacker. Consensus had him at 166. I didn't have him as a draftable grade, or I had him as a late 7th. So he was a little bit of a reach there. Might provide some value, but he's a little bit undersized and athletic. Special teams guy, rotational defensive linebacker. And then the Vikings come in and draft some depth at tight end and Gavin Bartholomew at the end of the draft. So overall, I think the Vikings, I like Donovan Jackson, but they just didn't get more draft assets in this year's draft, which I thought that they would do. I don't know how many players they're going to get from this draft that are going to contribute on this team this year. One probably for sure. We'll see. You might get some special teams guys there. I think Ty is going to be Felton might be pushed down the depth chart to start this year. So overall, I thought they had one really, really good pick, and that was Donovan Jackson, though I would have liked to have seen them trade down. A couple puzzling picks in Felton and maybe a little bit of the Ingham Dawkins. I really was puzzled by the Ty Felton pick. Didn't really get any players there where they got really good value in terms of where they were picked on the draft board. So overall, I gave the Vikings a C- grade. That takes us to the home of the 2025 NFL draft, and that was in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And so we're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers next. They started off their draft in round 1, pick 23 overall, and got Matthew Golden, which gave us one of the absolute best moments of the entire 2025 NFL draft, as they did shock a lot of people, and they did take a wide receiver, which they have not done but one other time this century. So they got a good player in Matthew Golden. I was a little bit lower than a lot of the draft pundits out there. I had him at 36 on my big board. The consensus, surprisingly, was a little bit lower than I thought they would be at pick 30. So that's where he fell. So yeah, okay value there. He's going to be a pretty good player. Fits kind of what Green Bay likes in the receivers. I would have liked to have seen a little taller receiver, maybe a guy who had the potential to be a wide receiver 1. maybe an X type of receiver. There are so few of those true X receivers available in this draft, and honestly out there in the NFL. Not that I don't like Matthew Golden. That's just kind of what I would have preferred to see what Green Bay needs. They did have a desperate need at wide receiver. They've had some injury concerns with two of the receivers. I don't think Watson's going to be here next year, and who knows what he will be down the road. You have Dobbs and the concussions. You have seen exactly what I thought would happen with Dontavian Wicks. I didn't have him as a draftable player when he came out of the University of Virginia because of the drops, and you see it. He just cannot hang on to the ball. Jalen Reed's turned out to be a better receiver than I thought he would be in the NFL. So they had a desperate need at receiver. They solved it. They didn't wait. They broke some of their tradition and created a really great moment in Green Bay. But then they followed it up with basically the rest of their draft. For me, is quite confusing and quite puzzling with just about every single one of their picks. Anthony Belton, understand getting a tackle, getting some depth there. He just doesn't fit kind of the style that I've seen Green Bay typically go for. Like if you look like Zach Tom, Anthony Belton might slide into guard, may play tackle. He's a big guy, kind of in that Becton style. I had Belton at 121 on my big board. Consensus, I had him at 100, and he went much higher than that, obviously. But I get it. There was a tackle offensive line run here early in the draft. So if teams are looking to get one, I understand trying to jump on one. But that was really surprising that Belton was the style of offensive lineman that they did pick here. He could develop into a really good offensive tackle. He really could. I see it. I wasn't like low on him per se. I did have him in my top 10 offensive linemen. I had him at number 10 on my list. I had him as a 4th round grade. That was just a surprising pick. And then we come back in the next round and you get Savion Williams in the 3rd round at pick 82, who I had had him at 192 on my draft board, a 5th round grade. The consensus had him at 93. And the difference for me is I see Savion as a true gadget player. You're going to play him in the Wildcat, play him at running back, play him at wide receiver. He drops the ball. He's tall, athletic, doesn't run routes. So he's kind of going to be your Cordell Patterson, Laviska Shenault type player. He's a gadget player, not a true wide receiver. And as I just mentioned with Green Bay's need at wide receiver, not doubling up and getting a wide receiver that actually is ready for the role of wide receiver, I think is truly puzzling in the 3rd round. In 87 overall. Consensus says, hey, that's great value. I just don't see it. I don't see how those players have over the years have worked out very well and justified the spot where teams grab them. I knew someone probably would grab him in on day 2. Just, you get the position coach or the GM or someone in the staff salivating over what they think they can do with Savion. And maybe this one's going to be different. And maybe he will. But I just don't see the value there in the 3rd round. There's a very puzzling pick. You come back in the 4th round, picked Barron Sorrell out of Texas. I had him at 194 on my big board. Consensus 123. So again, a little bit of a reach on my big board. I think Barron's kind of just a guy. I think he can provide some depth for you and be, maybe just I'll call a typical war player, if you're using the baseball term, maybe an average wins over replacement, not going to be a guy who's going to get you more or less, but just kind of be an average fill-in, a rotational piece on the edge. Then you come back in the 5th round at pick 159 with Colin Oliver, a guy I did not have a draftable grade on. Super athletic. All he's got is speed. Doesn't really have pass rush moves. Had some really good production early in his college career. I had him, again, not as a draftable grade. Consensus at 252, so it's barely a draftable grade, and you took him at 159. Come back with Warren Brinson, a rotational defensive tackle. In the 6th round, I had him at 244 on my board. Consensus at 231. Then you come back with Michael Robinson. Both, I did not have a draftable grade on Micah Robinson. The consensus big board didn't even have him in their top 480 players on their board, so they didn't even have him on their board. So that was a real surprising, pick there in the 6th round. I get maybe trying to take a dart on a kid that could develop. And then John Williams, the offensive tackle out of Cincinnati, I didn't have a draftable grade on him either, but developmental tackle there that you could get. You got there in the 7th round. So overall, Green Bay just felt like their entire draft was going, for players just that were reaches, going a lot with the height, weight, speed, athletic guys. Um, I don't know how down the road how many players on this roster are going to give you it's going to be starters, going to give you a lot of playing time. I think you got a lot of rotational pieces, backups. Hopefully they get some guys here who are going to be on the roster for a few years. So I don't know if they really capitalized on what they had in draft capital. So I was not a fan of their draft at all. A lot of puzzling picks, like with Savion Williams, Colin Oliver, a little bit of Micah Robinson. Again, you're at the 7th round. You're at pick 237. So you can't really, harp on it too much. He's a really tough cornerback, but did not like the 3rd round pick at all. And I gave the Green Bay Packers a D minus. I would have loved to have given them an F because I just didn't see it with this draft. But they did get Matthew Golden, which is a desperate need and a pretty decent player who I think can develop into a really good wide receiver too. So a D minus grade for the Green Bay Packers. That brings me to my Detroit Lions. And my Lions started off their draft by picking up Tyleik Williams, the defensive tackle out of Ohio State. It's a pretty solid pick, typical Lions pick, building in the trenches. He was one of the players that I thought was on the short list that the Lions would take. I also had Donovan Johnson, Shamar Stewart, those types of players when I was doing my mocks. So I think it's good value. It's good looking for into the future as a good DJ Reader replacement. It's also going to help maybe fill a void, not having a Lee McNeil to start the season. He'll be a rotational piece to fill in with a lot of the guys that they brought in. They did bring in quite a few guys. It's going to help stop the run. The Lions put an emphasis on stopping the run. I like the player. I just was a little surprised they didn't go, at least in my board and a lot of people's boards, as best player available. Jihad Campbell falling there. I didn't really think that Jihad would really get there. I know the torn labrum was a concern, but I thought it seemed like Tampa Bay or somebody else would have picked him long before he got to the Lions. And sitting there at pick 28 overall in the 1st round, I was kind of surprised they did pass on Jihad Campbell. And basically that allowed him to slide all the way down to the Philadelphia Eagles. It's kind of a nitpick. I just sat there in the draft, like looking at who was available on my board. And you had some guys there who were rated in the top 10 on my board, just sitting right there. One of them being Jihad, Mike Green, the other, and then Malachi Starks went 1 pick before Detroit. I didn't think Detroit would be on Mike Green, given what we heard about all of the off the field stuff. So that's where I'm going to kind of nitpick with the pick there a little bit. Not picking Jihad Campbell. Coming back in the 2nd round, they traded up a few spots to get Tate Ratledge. Would have rather seen them not give up an asset, but I get it. It's not a big deal. It's only a few picks. They gave up, I believe, a 4th round pick to move up, but they did get a guy who, in a lot of my mock drafts, I had paired the Lions and Tate Ratledge. If you're looking for a player, if you look in the dictionary, that under Detroit Lions draft pick, there probably is a picture of Tate Ratledge right there. He looks the part, acts the part, plays the part. He is just a true Detroit Lions pick. I love the position that they filled. I think the value is there. I had him at 43 on my big board. The consensus a little different. They had him at 80. He was one of my guys that I really liked in this draft. I think he fits perfectly with what the Detroit Lions needed. They lose Kevin Zeitler. You saw some promise in last year's 6th round draft pick in Christian Mahogany that gives them some added depth. Maybe he doesn't win the spot. Maybe he does. But I think that gives them a really good player to help solidify the offensive line. The offensive line is the engine that's going to make the Detroit Lions run. Everything runs from there. You have to have that solid offensive line to give Jared Goff the time that he needs to make the right reads, keep him on his feet and not on his back. So great value in Tate Ratledge. And then we move into pick number 70 in round 3. And that is Isaac Teslaa, the wide receiver out of the University of Arkansas. He is a player I really liked as one of my late, day 3 sleepers. He's tall, I believe 6'3", 6'4", runs a mid-4 440s. Great blocker, doesn't miss passes. I see the potential, but I viewed him as a late 4th, maybe early 5th round graded player because in college, you see those players who have all those tools and tangibles, the height, the weight, the speed that you're looking for, but just doesn't have the production that you see in college. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? Is it just that he didn't have the ability to get that sort of production? Is it bad scheme fit? Is it quarterback play? All of those factors you have to weigh in. And I think he would have been he's a great player that fourth, fifth round you take and that could develop into a very solid starter. And he has the upside that is even higher than that. I totally see what Brad Holmes is seeing in Isaac Teslaa. It's a great story. He grew up a Lions fan. He's from Hillsdale, Michigan. Great story with Isaac Teslaa. Great potential. I do see it. Here's the flip side, though. And I'm just going to call it like I see it. And I do see that a little bit of what Brad Holmes' Achilles heel could be is his arrogance and hubris and trying to just get my guys, coming across as a little bit too New England Patriots-esque, and that these are our guys, we're going to get them. And it isn't just that you're taking them over the draft value on a consensus board. In this case, this is multiple years in a row. You're using a lot of draft assets, a lot of draft capital to go get your guys. And I get it. You have a type, and they've done a phenomenal job at identifying those players, and they've turned the franchise around to possibly being Super Bowl contenders legit for me for the first time in my entire life and in my dad's entire life. However, 3 years in a row and 2 years in a row, you give up future assets to get a player. They move up 32 spots to give up 2 third-round picks. I know it seems like a lot, and the draft value chart, and you'll if you're out there and you see that there's a draft value chart that Pride of Detroit on their Twitter shared, it doesn't look as bad when you look at the Jimmy Johnson and you look at the Rich Hill draft charts. It's not as bad as what we think, what the draft media thinks, what the pundits, what I think, what the fans think. It looks really, really outrageous that you traded 2 third-round picks to move up for, quite honestly, what is a project high ceiling player in Isaac Teslaa. And giving up those 2 future thirds, I think, is irresponsible when you're in your Super Bowl winning window. And one of the rationales I have for that is you look at what we were able to give up last year to get a veteran player that we needed, like Carlton Davis. You look at what we were able to do and move up into the first round and get a Terrion Arnold. You go into next year, you don't have that. You look at all the injuries that we had this last year. That is a big reason that prevented us from reaching the ceiling and reaching the ultimate goal. We basically ran out of guys on defense. Well, at the trade deadline, you're not going to have a third-round draft pick to trade away. You're going to have to give up bigger assets, or maybe you don't have the draft capital the team's going to need for a player that you might want to make a move for. You move into next offseason, and maybe you're looking for a veteran to fill a hole on your roster. You don't have that draft capital now. Is that worth it to take this swing on one of your guys? Now, there is an argument to be said that Isaac may have been there at 102. I don't necessarily buy that. You did see a lot of the height, weight, speed, athletic guys start to go, the contested catch guys. I look back at the draft board and see where Pat Bryant went just behind there. So I don't know if it's actually true. Now, maybe they could have waited a little bit down the board and gave up less than what they had to give up. But listen, Brad saw it, but has any of these players yet worked out that he's made these big moves for? Broderick Martin, Sione Vaki, Giovanni Manu, now Isaac Teslaa. So far, none of them. Now, to be fair, it's early. You need some more developmental time for Manu. Sione Vaki, they did it. He knew he was going to be like this amazing special teams ace. But I have to just call the balls and strikes as I see it. I think it's blatantly irresponsible and kind of arrogant for Brad and the Lions to do what they've been doing and giving up all these future assets. I think the risk outweighs the reward. And there's a little bit of hubris there that I think is concerning. And I hope we don't end up with one of these days, a Cole Strange first round draft pick type from the Lions. Because they've done it in the mid to late rounds where they've moved up. So at least they haven't done that. Right. They haven't massively overdrafted a player in the first round where pretty much everyone thought that they would be there in like the 4th or 5th. But that's just my thoughts. on that. I spent a little bit more time on that one because that one was one of the top most surprising and shocking things that we did see throughout the 3 days of the NFL draft. So not something I was a big fan of. I really do like the player, and I think he has immense potential. And Brad Holmes deserves all the credit in the world. He's found Amon-Ra. He's helped find Cooper Kupp. He has proven that he has an eye for finding the wide receiver, moving up to get Jameson Williams, though it took a couple years. So I do give him the benefit of the doubt, but I just don't think I think the risk outweighs the reward. So moving along, next though, they got great value in the 5th round at 171 overall, getting Miles Frazier. I had 110th on my board. Consensus had 118. Excellent pass blocker. Didn't give up a sack all last year, and I think even longer. That might have been 2 years, giving up no sacks. I think he can come in. I think he has the ability to be a good starter at the NFL level with the floor of being a good swing backup offensive guard and maybe in a pinch at tackle because he has played tackle in college. That's phenomenal value there in the 5th round. Then getting another one of my guys in the defensive end, Ahmed Hassanian, the edge from Boise State. I was really high on him. I had him as my 118th overall player. The consensus big board didn't have him ranked at all. I think there's tremendous upside with him. Only been playing football for 5 years. Right now, he's all grit, all motor, needs to develop some pass rush moves, needs some coaching. But again, with only playing that limited amount of football, you can see it, but he has tremendous potential. I think that's a great pick in the 6th round. Then you come back in round 70 at pick 230. Another guy I really liked. I think he fits the Lions mantra very well. He was a walk-on safety at the University of Georgia. He's a hard hitter, has just an eye for the ball. And there was a sneaky need that the Lions had was the back end of their safety room. Their starters are some of the best safeties in the NFL, maybe the best tandem in the NFL. But behind that, they're really lacking some depth. And so I think picking a safety like Jackson is great value. I thought they would pick a safety in this draft. I thought there was value on day 3. There's a few I liked. Jackson was definitely picked where he should have been. I had him at 235 on my draft board. So that's great value for right where he should have been picked. And then Don McLovett is kind of that speed dart throw wide receiver. I had him and not as a draftable grade. It was a UDFA. He's probably on their roster, their Antoine Green replacement. Speed guy Green is going to retire due to some injuries. I don't know if Lovett makes the roster given the depth that they have at wide receiver, and especially with adding Isaac Teslaa. So I think overall the players they got, I think you're going to see Ratledge could win the starting job. You're going to see Williams play. You'll probably see Ahmad be a rotational piece at edge. Jackson will provide great value on special teams. So I think they got some players who you're going to see that are going to provide some use on the roster. But I really have to hammer them for the use of resources and how they went around the process of getting some of their players. And I gave the Lions a C+ grade. Overall, I think the players they got on the roster are probably a higher grade than that. But when you encapsulate everything, including that process, it's a C+ grade for me. And that is even as a Lions fan, I'm being a little bit extra critical. So I'm not too much of a homer when it comes to my team, but a C+ grade. And overall, the 4 teams in the NFC North, they definitely didn't have higher echelon drafts. The Bears being I think having the best draft of anyone in the NFC North. They had 2 teams here who fit in the bottom tiers of my drafts. So that's my recap of the NFC North. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. We got quite a few more recaps to go. I'm going to do division by division. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my assessments. Am I off base? I'm pretty sure if anybody from the Green Bay fans watch this draft, I'm going to get absolutely hammered. I get it. We all have opinions. Most of the time we're going to be wrong, but that's makes the NFL draft a lot of fun. So thank you guys for joining me on this episode of the Draft Beard podcast. I'm looking forward to going over the rest of the recap and moving on to the rest of the NFL offseason, and the NFL season's right around the corner and the schedule release is around the corner as well. So have a great night, everyone.
Draft Beard podcast.